Tonight, history is tightening its grip, not quietly, violently. Millions of Iranians are in the streets, unarmed, defiant, facing one of the most brutal regimes on earth. For more than 2 weeks, men and women across the country have risen with extraordinary courage, and the response has been lethal. More than 12,000 killed, possibly 20,000. That number matters, because it is 5 times the combined deaths of September 11th and October 7th. This is not unrest. This is mass killing, crimes against humanity on a scale rarely seen since World War II. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Moments like this do not come often. When they do, they redefine nations and leaders. Right now, President Trump is weighing his next move. Military assets are shifting. All options are on the table. If you want to understand why this moment could change the Middle East forever, stay with me. Because before we talk about solutions, we need to understand the problem itself, and it runs deeper than you think. Let's be clear about what is actually happening. This is not simply a protest movement, and it is not just another cycle of unrest in Iran. What we are witnessing is a direct confrontation between a population and a system built on fear. For 47 years, the Islamic Republic has survived through repression. Political prisons, executions, silence enforced at gunpoint. Now that silence is breaking, millions of people are no longer asking for reform. They are demanding an end. The regime understands this. That is why it responds with bullets instead of dialogue. This is the core mechanism of authoritarian survival. When legitimacy collapses, violence becomes policy. The stakes, however, go far beyond Iran's borders. This regime funds terrorist proxies, it destabilizes the Middle East, it threatens global security, and according to the content we are analyzing, it has even threatened the life of an American president. So the question is no longer whether Iran is in crisis. The question is whether this crisis becomes a turning point. To answer that, we have to look backward, because this system did not emerge overnight. To understand this moment, you have to understand the system behind it. The Islamic Republic has ruled Iran for 47 years, not through consent but through control. A justice system designed to punish, not protect, prisons filled with political dissidents. Stories like Naviv Mabe's are not exceptions, they are the pattern. This regime learned early that fear is cheaper than reform and more effective. Over time, repression became institutional. Courts became tools. Security forces became policy. Violence became routine. But systems like this create their own weakness. They depend on obedience. And obedience collapses when people lose fear. What we are seeing now is not spontaneous. It is cumulative. Decades of brutality, layered one on top of another, finally reaching a breaking point. When millions take to the streets knowing they may not return home, something fundamental has shifted. History shows us this pattern again and again. When fear evaporates, regimes fall fast. But collapse is never clean. It produces explosions before endings. And Iran is approaching that explosive phase, which brings us to the first major rupture. The moment when the world could no longer look away. Then came the rupture. Not symbolic, not rhetorical, but unmistakably violent. The regime began killing its own people at scale. More than 12,000 confirmed dead, possibly 20,000. Let that number settle. This was not crowd control, this was extermination logic. A state signaling that it would rather rule over graves than concede power. For a global audience, the comparison is chilling. More than 5 times the combined deaths of September 11th and October 7th. In modern history, massacres of this magnitude are rare. You have to reach back to World War II to find parallels. This is why the moment matters, because mass killing changes calculations. Inside Iran, it erases the possibility of compromise. Outside Iran, it forces moral clarity, neutrality becomes complicity, and leadership becomes unavoidable. This is where President Trump enters the story. not as a commentator, but as a potential disruptor of history. If you're trying to understand why the world is watching him now, pause here, because what looks like chaos is actually structure. And the structure is about to be exposed. What looks like chaos is in fact a system working exactly as designed. Authoritarian regimes survive by exporting pressure outward. When internal legitimacy collapses, they redirect force. This is the hidden mechanism. Iran's leadership does not rule by popularity. It rules by deterrence. At home through fear, abroad through proxies. Hamas, Hezbollah, militias spread across the region. Terror becomes foreign policy. This is not ideological theater. It is strategic insulation. By destabilizing the Middle East, the regime buys itself time. By threatening others, it deters intervention. This is why the nuclear issue matters so much. A regime willing to slaughter 20,000 of its own people cannot be trusted with ultimate power. Nuclear capability is not defense in this context. It is immunity. And this is where deterrence re-enters the story. According to the content, President Trump did something no other US president had done. He showed he was not afraid. He enforced consequences. He reintroduced uncertainty into a system that depends on predictability. That disruption is now colliding with internal collapse. And when internal collapse meets external pressure, systems crack. The next crack is already forming, and it will come faster than anyone expects. The second surge is already underway, and this one is faster, more dangerous, because it is no longer just about protest. It is about deterrence breaking down. The regime is facing pressure from two directions at once, from the streets and from the outside. According to the content, President Trump dismantled Iran's nuclear trajectory. He eliminated Qasem Soleimani, described here as the world's most notorious terrorist. That mattered more than many realized at the time, because it sent a signal the regime had not heard before. There are lines, and crossing them has consequences. Now combine that external pressure with internal revolt. This is when systems panic. Security forces become overstretched. Decision-making becomes erratic. Violence accelerates, not because the regime is strong, but because it is afraid. History shows us this pattern clearly. When authoritarian regimes escalate simultaneously at home and abroad, they expose their limits. They reveal how much force they actually have left, and how little legitimacy remains. This is the most unstable phase of all, because from here, outcomes stop being predictable, and unpredictability changes everything, especially for the people caught in the middle. Which brings us to the most important question of all: what does this mean for you? Now let's bring this back to where it really lands, with you. Imagine waking up knowing today might be the day you don't come home. Not because you committed a crime, but because you stood in a street, because you asked for dignity, because you refused silence. This is what millions of Iranians are living through right now. Parents sending their children out not knowing if they will return. Young men and women facing armed forces with nothing but courage. And still they go. That tells you something profound. Fear no longer works. And when fear stops working, regimes lose their greatest weapon. But here is the painful truth. Courage alone is not always enough. History shows that moments like this require alignment between people on the ground and power beyond their borders. This is why global attention matters, why pressure matters, why leadership matters. If you are watching this, you are not neutral. Witness itself is a form of participation, and indifference is a decision. If you believe freedom matters anywhere, it matters everywhere. Stay with me, because what happens next will not stay inside Iran. Its consequences will ripple across the world. What is unfolding in Iran does not end at its borders. It never does. This regime sits at the center of a volatile web. Energy routes, terror networks, regional power balances. When Iran shakes, the Middle East trembles. A regime that funds Hamas and Hezbollah does not collapse quietly. Its proxies react, its rivals recalibrate, its enemies prepare. This is why global leaders are watching so closely, because a weakened Iran changes everything. For Israel, it alters existential threat calculations. For the region, it redraws alliances. For the world, it reshapes energy and security flows. Remember this: Iran holds one of the largest oil and gas reserves on the planet. A free Iran is not just a moral shift, it is an economic one, an energy partner instead of a destabilizer. Peace through integration, not intimidation. This is where history echoes moments like the fall of the Berlin Wall. When systems collapse, the global order adjusts overnight, but transitions are dangerous. Power vacuums invite chaos before stability. This is the narrow bridge the world now stands on. What happens next depends on choices made under pressure, and those choices will define the future. Which brings us to the hardest question: where does this road actually lead? From this point forward, the future splits, not into certainty, but into scenarios. The first is the hopeful one. Pressure holds, the people endure, external deterrence prevents mass escalation, the regime fractures from within, power transitions, not overnight, but irreversibly. Iran begins moving toward normal relations with the United States. With Israel, energy flows stabilize, terror networks weaken. This becomes a slow, difficult, but historic realignment. The second scenario is murkier. The regime survives but permanently damaged. Violence declines, not because of reform, but exhaustion. Iran remains unstable. Protests simmer. The leadership governs a broken society. The region stays tense. The world lives with managed volatility. No resolution, just delay. Then there is the darkest path. The regime doubles down. Mass killing escalates. Proxies ignite regional conflict. Miscalculation triggers war. In this scenario, everyone loses. History teaches us this lesson. Systems do not choose wisely under fear. They choose survival. And survival logic is ruthless. Which future emerges will not be accidental. It will be shaped by decisions made now, by leaders, by pressure, by whether the world acts or looks away. And that brings us to the final reckoning. This is one of those moments history will not forget. Not because it was inevitable, but because it was chosen. Years from now, people will ask a simple question. When millions of Iranians stood unarmed against bullets, who stood with them? This is not only about Iran, it is about whether power still answers to principle, whether leadership still means risk, whether the world still believes that freedom is worth defending before it is too late. According to the story we've examined, President Trump's legacy is now intertwined with this decision, not as rhetoric, but as action. History rarely offers clean victories, but it does offer defining moments. This is one of them. For Iran, for the Middle East, for the global order you live inside every day. If you want to understand how moments like this reshape the world, stay with this channel, share this analysis, because awareness is not passive. It is the first step toward pressure, and pressure is how history moves. The next chapter is already being written, and I'll be here to break it down when it happens.